Podbean, your message amplified.
Ready to share your message with the world? Start your podcast journey with Podbean.
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 Podbean. Podbean, the AI-powered all-in-one podcast platform.
Thousands of businesses and enterprises trust Podbean to launch their podcasts.
Launch your podcast on Podbean today.
My school uses Podbean.
My church, too.
I love it. I really do.
You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium. Available on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean, and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about the dark story of Lou Costello. So it's over to you now, Mark, for this week's comedic revelation.
Louis Francis Cristillo, who is better known, of course, as Lou Costello, was an American comedian, actor and producer who was probably best known for his double act with the straight man and comic feed Bud Abbott. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, who teamed up in burlesque in 1936, were among the most popular and highest paid entertainers in the world during World War II, and during a national tour in 1942 they sold over $85 million worth of war bonds in just 35 days. However, by 1955 their popularity waned from overexposure, and so consequently their film and television contracts lapsed. As their careers grew more successful, serious cracks began to appear in Abbott and Costello's relationship, and in the March of 1943, after completing a winter tour of army bases, Lou Costello suffered an attack of rheumatic fever and so was unable to work for 6 months. And in 1954, Lou Costello was forced to withdraw from more work, again after suffering from a rheumatic fever relapse. In the early 1950s, troubles with the Internal Revenue Service forced both men to sell their large homes, along with the rights to some of their films, with their final film together, Dance With Me Henry in 1956, being a box office disappointment. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello dissolved their partnership amicably in early 1957, and shortly after the completion of Lou Costello's only film after his partnership with Bud Abbott ended, which was called The 30-Foot Bride of Candy Rock, Lou Costello suffered a heart attack and unfortunately died at the Doctors Hospital in Beverly Hills on the 3rd of March in 1959. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this single double act episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, a man with a very dark and disturbed sense of humour, and someone who, when he has trouble doing something right the first time, finds that there is nobody to appreciate how difficult it was. But to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every week, usually on a Tuesday night, though occasionally on a Wednesday, allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of other paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, serial killers, the darker side of some past celebrities, and the occasional missing person that often goes unnoticed. So if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review or an opinion of this episode's subject that I can reply to. A thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell. Or if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. And if you do get a few minutes, perhaps you might like to check out my social media groups and pages, including Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, which are filled daily with all things unexplained and crime. I'll put a link to some of my socials in the description. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the sad and overshadowed tale surrounding the dark story of Lou Costello. And this week's necessary disclaimer. This story sadly involves the death of an infant, so may prove upsetting to some. You listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, it is a constant reminder that there are only three kinds of people in this world: those who can count and those who cannot. So, let's get back to the story. Louis Francis Cristillo, who is affectionately now known by all as Lou Costello, was born on the 6th of March in 1906 in Paterson, New Jersey, in the United States. He was the son of an Italian father named Sebastiano Cristillo, who was an insurance sales agent, and a mother who was an American Italian with both French and Irish ancestry named Helen, who worked as a silk weaver. Lou Costello attended a public school in Paterson in New Jersey and was considered a gifted athlete, fighting as a boxer under the name of Lou King, and who excelled in basketball, being reportedly twice known as Paterson's free throw champion, with some of his basketball prowess being seen in the Abbott and Costello movie from 1945 called Here Come the Coeds, in which he performs his very own trick basketball shots. As Lou Costello grew up, he started to become a great admirer of the silent film comedian Charlie Chaplin, and in 1927 he decided to hitchhike his way to Hollywood and try to become an actor. However, the only work he could find was either as a labourer or as an extra at either the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer or the Hal Roach Studios. And due to his athletic skills, he managed to get some occasional work as a stuntman. And if you look closely enough, he can be spotted sitting ringside in the Laurel and Hardy film from 1927 called The Battle of the Century. In a later interview during a high point in his career, he said that he took his professional name of Lou Costello from the actress Helen Costello, although by this time his brother Anthony Costello was also using the same name in his career as a professional musician. In 1928, and with the advent of talking pictures, Lou Costello then headed back east, intending to acquire some theatrical experience. And while stranded in St. Joseph, Missouri, he persuaded a local burlesque producer to hire him as a comic, and by the end of 1928, Lou Costello was back in his hometown of New Jersey, and in 1929 he began working in burlesque on the Mutual Burlesque Wheel. On a very quick side note here, the Mutual Burlesque Wheel, which is also called the Mutual Wheel or the MBA, was an American burlesque circuit that was active from 1922 until 1931 and was a preeminent burlesque circuit during the Roaring Twenties and was the home to many comedians of the era. After the Mutual Burlesque Wheel collapsed during the Great Depression, Lou Costello worked for several other stock burlesque impresarios, including at a place called Minsky's, where he crossed paths with the talented producer and straight man Bud Abbott. On the 30th of January in 1934, Lou Costello married Ann Battler, who was a burlesque chorus dancer. Together they had 3 children. Their first child, Patricia, was born in 1936, followed by Carol on the 23rd of December in 1938, and Lou Jr., also nicknamed Butch, on the 6th of November in 1942. The two comedians, Bud and Lou, had crossed paths a few times previously. However, they didn't officially work together until 1935 at the Eltinge Burlesque Theatre, which was located on 42nd Street in New York City, with their first performance resulting from Lou Costello's regular partner becoming ill, and Bud Abbott substituting in for him. Their first stint in working together became an instant hit, with other performers in the show, including Bud Abbott's wife Betty Smith, encouraging them to be a permanent double act. So the two men then started to build an act by refining and reworking numerous burlesque sketches, with Bud Abbott as the devious straight man and Lou Costello as the dim-witted comic, with them finally teaming up in 1936. As Team Abbott and Costello grew more successful, serious cracks started to appear in their relationship, with their first disagreement occurring in that first official year in 1936 over a booking at a minstrel show at the Steel Pier in Atlantic City in New Jersey. And even though it was outside their usual burlesque venues, Lou Costello wanted to accept the gig, but Bud Abbott, however, was very hesitant. So, as a compromise, Lou Costello offered Bud Abbott a larger split of the salary, to which Bud Abbott agreed, but by the end of 1941, Lou Costello insisted that the team now split all their income by 60-40 in Lou Costello's favour, to which Bud Abbott agreed. Over time, Abbott and Costello appeared in 36 films from 1940 to 1956 and were amongst the most popular and highest-paid entertainers in the world during World War II. In the March of 1943, after completing a winter tour of army bases, Lou Costello suffered an attack of rheumatic fever, and so consequently he was unable to work for 6 months. And then, later that same year, on the 4th of November, when he returned to the team's popular radio show, and while rehearsing at their NBC studio, tragedy struck. When Lou Costello received word that his infant son, Lou Jr., had accidentally drowned in the family pool. After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at further details regarding the loss of Lou Jr. and the further cracks into both the personal and professional relationship between Abbott and Costello.
Dare to discover the unknown? Book your own paranormal investigation at HAPRA 2026. The Haunted Antiques and Paranormal Research Centre, HAPRA, is now taking 2026 bookings, and your next supernatural adventure is just a £50 deposit away. New for 2026, we have upgraded. Our location now features improved sound insulation on all our windows, making it easier than ever to hear what should not be there. Bring your team, bring your equipment, explore the unexplained, record the impossible. Limited slots available, so secure yours now. Book now, believe later. hauntedresearchcentre.com.
Lou Costello's infant son, Lou Jr., was just 2 days short of his first birthday when he accidentally drowned in the family pool. Costello had originally asked his wife, Anne, to keep Lou Jr. up late just so he could hear his father's voice on the radio for the first time. And so, rather than cancel the broadcast, Lou Costello said to his partner, Bud Abbott, and I quote, wherever he is tonight, I want him to hear me. And so they proceeded with the show. No one in the studio audience knew anything about the death of Lou's infant son. until after the broadcast, when Bud Abbott made a statement and explained to them the sad events of the day, and that how his partner Lou Costello epitomised the phrase that the show must go on that night. Maxine Andrews, who was a member of the close harmony American singing group called the Andrews Sisters, said at the time regarding Lou Costello's demeanour that he had changed after the loss of his son. She continues, and I quote,
"He didn't seem as fun-loving and as warm. He seemed to anger easily. There was a difference in his attitude."
It's 1945, and Lou Costello, along with his working partner Bud Abbott, returned to MGM Studios to make 4 more movies, with their final film being The Naughty 90s from 1945. However, it wasn't all easy going and fun for our dynamic duo, because also in 1945, another rift had developed between them when Bud Abbott decided to hire a domestic servant who had just been fired by Lou Costello, with Lou Costello eventually refusing to speak to his partner except when performing on set. In fact, things got so bad between them that the following year, in 1946, when they made 2 more films, Little Giant and The Time of Their Lives, under their Universal contract, they both appeared as separate characters rather than as one double act. However, I feel I should point out here that this different formula may also be because their most recent films had not performed as well as had not performed as well at the box office. Eventually, this rift was resolved when Bud Abbott suggested naming Lou Costello's pet charity, which was a foundation for rheumatic fever sufferers and underprivileged children, to the Lou Costello Junior Youth Foundation, which touched Lou Costello very deeply. The facility opened in 1947 and still exists today, serving the Boyle Heights district of Los Angeles. On an interesting side note, rheumatic fever is an inflammatory disease that can involve the heart, joints, skin and brain, with the disease typically developing 2 to 4 weeks after a streptococcal sore throat infection. Signs and symptoms include fever, multiple painful joints, involuntary muscle movements, and occasionally a characteristic non-itchy rash known as a skin condition called erythema marginatum. The heart is involved in about half of these cases, which causes damage to the heart valves, known as rheumatic heart disease, or RHD for short, and usually occurs after repeated attacks of rheumatic fever. However, it can sometimes occur after just one, and the damaged heart valves may then result in heart failure, atrial fibrillation and infection. In 1951, the duo began to appear on live television, and in 1952 they filmed their situation comedy called The Abbott and Costello Show, which began running in syndication nationwide, with Lou Costello owning the half-hour series outright and Bud Abbott working on salary. The show itself, which was loosely adapted from their radio programmes and earlier films, ran for 2 seasons from 1952 to 1954, but has found a long life in syndicated reruns. In fact, the whole series is available on YouTube, which I highly recommend you watch, especially if you like slapstick or wordplay humour. Then, in 1954, tragedy struck again when Abbott and Costello were forced to withdraw from filming the movie Fireman Save My Child after Lou Costello suffered a relapse of rheumatic fever, with their parts being replaced by the American actor Hugh O'Brien and the American comedy actor Buddy Hackett. I will talk more about Buddy Hackett later in this podcast. In 1956, Lou Costello was both surprised and honoured by the appearance of the American radio and television host Ralph Edwards on NBC's This Is Your Life. On an interesting side note here, and for those of you who aren't old enough to remember, This Is Your Life was an American reality documentary series hosted by its creator and producer Ralph Edwards that was broadcast on NBC radio from 1948 to 1952 and later on NBC television from 1952 to 1961. In the programme, the host would surprise guests or celebrities and then take them through a retrospective journey of their lives in front of an audience, including appearances by colleagues, friends and family. Ralph Edwards revived the show in 1971 to 1972, and then the American character actor Joseph Campanella hosted a version in 1983, with Ralph Edwards returning for various specials in the late 1980s. The United Kingdom's version of the show was hosted by Eamon Andrews from 1955 until 1964, and then from 1969 until his death in 1987, when it was taken over by Michael Aspel until the show ran its course and ended in 2003. In 1952, Abbott and Costello sued Universal Pictures for a breach of contract for $500,000, but by the mid-1950s, the boys were no longer ranked as among the top box office stars that they once were. This was due both to being undermined by overexposure with their concurrent film and television appearances, and that they were eclipsed by another double act known as Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, who were as popular in the 1950s as Abbott and Costello had been a decade earlier. And so consequently, by 1955, Lou Costello and Bud Abbott could not reach a contract agreement with Universal and left the studio after 15 years. In the early 1950s, both Lou Costello and Bud Abbott got into serious financial trouble with the Internal Revenue Service when the IRS disallowed $500,000 each in tax exemptions, which in turn then forced both men to sell their large homes and most of their assets, along with the rights to some of their films. And their final film together, called Dance With Me Henry, which was an independent movie from 1956, received a mixture of critical reviews and was a box office disappointment. And so consequently, Abbott and Costello dissolved their partnership in early 1957. Now, there does seem to be a bit of contradicting information here, regarding the duo's breakup, with some literature claiming that it was an amicable split and some claiming otherwise. You see, according to Errol Flynn's biography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, published in 1959, he claims that Flynn himself was the one who triggered the breakup. Errol Flynn, who was a chronic practical joker, invited both Abbott and Costello, along with their wives and children, to his house for dinner one evening, and after they had all eaten, he then commenced to show a home movie that, accidentally, turned out to be hardcore pornography. And while Errol Flynn was pretending to be baffled, both Abbott and Costello blamed each other for the film's substitute. Lou Costello then started working with other comedians, which included the likes of Sidney Fields in Las Vegas, and sought various other film and television projects. In his last years, Lou Costello made about 10 solo appearances on Steve Allen's The Tonight Show, with him most often performing his old routines with either the comedic actor Louis Nye or the American actor Tom Poston in the straight man role. And in 1958, he also played a dramatic role in an episode of Wagon Train called The Tobias Jones Story. On an interesting side note, Wagon Train was an American Western television series that aired for 8 seasons, first on the NBC television network starting on the 8th of September in 1957 to 1962, and then on ABC from 1962 till 1965, reaching the top of the Nielsen ratings. It was the fictional adventure story of a large westbound wagon train that was travelling through the American frontier from Missouri to California, with its format attracting many famous guest stars at the time for each episode, appearing as either travellers or residents of the settlements whom the regular cast encountered. The show initially starred the film actor Ward Bond as the wagon master, and was then replaced after his death in 1960 by John McIntyre, along with the actor Robert Horton as the scout, who was then eventually replaced by another actor named Robert Fuller. The series was inspired by the 1950 film called Wagon Master and the 1930 early widescreen film called The Big Trail, both featuring the aforementioned actor Ward Bond, with the series also influencing the development of the original Star Trek series, which was pitched at the time as Wagon Train to the Stars and launched in 1966. After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at the death, legacy and memorials that are dedicated to the memory of Lou Costello, and a little look at the autobiographical film from 1978.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07 852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk. Or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
Shortly after the completion of his only film, and without the partnership of Bud Abbott, called The 30-Foot Bride of Candy Rock in 1959, Lou Costello suffered a heart attack. He died at the Doctors' Hospital in Beverly Hills on the 3rd of March that same year, 3 days before his 53rd birthday. There are several different circumstances that have been reported as to Lou Costello's last day and his final words. According to some reports, he told visitors that the strawberry ice cream soda that he had just finished consuming was, and I quote, "the best I'd ever tasted." And then he died. But other reports, including those of several concurrent obituaries, say the strawberry ice cream soda exchange occurred earlier that same day, claiming that after his wife and friends had departed, he asked his nurse to adjust his position in his bed just before suffering the fatal heart attack. After a funeral mass at his Catholic parish, St. Francis de Sales in Sherman's Oaks, Lou Costello was interred at the Cavalry Cemetery in East Los Angeles on the 8th of March in 1959. Then, 9 months later, on the 5th of December that same year, his wife, Anne, passed away from an apparent heart attack at the age of just 47. Come forward a few years to the 26th of June in 1992, and the city of Paterson, New Jersey, in conjunction with Lou Costello's Memorial Association, erected a life-size statue of Lou in the newly named Lou Costello Memorial Park in the city's historic downtown section. The statue itself shows Lou Costello holding a baseball bat, which is, of course, a reference to the comedy duo's most famous routine, Who's On First. And on that note, if you haven't heard the Who's On First routine, I highly recommend you look it up on YouTube. It may be from 1945, but believe me, the wordplay and the comic timing between the two men is still just as hilarious today. Come forward a few years again to the March of 2006, and in Paterson, New Jersey, the centennial of Lou Costello's birth was celebrated. And in 2009, Lou Costello was inducted into the New Jersey Hall of Fame. Before I end this podcast, I want to take a look into a potted history regarding the format of the lead and feed comedy double act. Well, according to Wikipedia, humour is often derived from the uneven relationship between two partners that are usually of the same gender, age, ethnic origin and profession, but drastically different in terms of their personality or behaviour, with each one serving as a foil to the other. Typically, one member of the duo is the straight man or the feed, deadwood or stooge, and is often portrayed as being reasonable and serious, while the other one, otherwise known as the funny man, banana man or comic, is portrayed as funny, less educated or less intelligent, silly or unorthodox. Although having said that, there are also double acts in which neither partner is the straight man or even both. And when the audience identifies primarily with one character, the other is often referred to as the comic foil, with the term feed coming from a way a straight man sets up the jokes and then feeds them to his partner. Despite the names of lead and feed often being given to the roles, the straight man is not always humourless, nor is it always the comic who provides the act's humour, and sometimes the straight man gets laughs through sarcastic reactions to the comic's antics. When the straight man serves no specific comic purpose but acts as a device to make the comic look good, he is known as the stooge, which is sometimes considered a derogatory term. However, the name stooge did begin to fall out of use by the 1930s with the Three Stooges. Most often, the humour in a double act comes from the way the two personalities play off each other rather than the individual players. And in many successful acts, the roles are interchangeable. The model for the modern double act began in the British music halls and the American vaudeville scene of the late 19th century, where the straight man was needed to repeat the lines of the comic simply because the audiences were too noisy. With this dynamic soon developing, in which the straight man soon became a more integral part of the act by setting up jokes for the comic to deliver a punchline. Over the years there have been many examples of the double act, but I won't go into every single one. However, my own personal favourites are, and in no particular order, probably Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello, and of course not forgetting Morecambe and Wise. I can't really do a podcast about Lou Costello without mentioning the made-for-TV drama called Bud and Lou from 1978. The film stars Buddy Hackett as Lou Costello, Harvey Korman as Bud Abbott, along with Michelle Lee as Lou's wife Anne, and was directed by Robert C. Thompson. The film itself explores the professional and personal lives of the legendary comedy duo from their humble beginnings in vaudeville to their success in radio, film and television, highlighting their rise to fame and the challenges they faced along the way. It also showcases their iconic routines, including the famous aforementioned Who's On First sketch, and captures the essence of their comedic partnership. It did get a bit of a panning when it was first released back in the late 70s and was seen as a lacklustre attempt to portray our heroes from behind the scenes of their films, theatre and television work. Although, to be honest, it doesn't really mention the TV work as a whole, but you get what I mean. I also read somewhere, probably online, that Buddy Hackett, who portrayed Lou Costello, actually wrote to one of Lou Costello's daughters at the time of the film's release, apologising for what he felt was a poor imitation of her father. I have watched the film, and I'll be honest with you, although it does play around with the timeline a little bit, and let's be honest, what autobiographical film isn't guilty of doing that, and it does fictionally change some of the characters' involvement with the boys' lives, I did actually enjoy it very much, and I thought that both the players did a superb job of playing the double act, with a special mention to Bud Hackett in one of his few dramatic roles of his excellent portrayal of Lou Costello. If you are interested, the movie is available on YouTube. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello are among the few non-baseball personnel to be memorialised in the Baseball Hall of Fame, although, and at the same time, they are not formal inductees. They have had a plaque and a gold record of the Who's On First sketch on permanent display there since 1956, along with a video of the routine which loops endlessly in the exhibition area. Now, I know this episode of Mark's Unexplained World has been a little bit different to most of my other shows in that I do not really mention anything paranormal or unexplained. I suppose I just wanted to do something a little bit different, not just for me, but also for my listeners out there, because I love you all. But not to worry, I haven't forgotten my paranormal roots, and my show will be back to normal, or abnormal, next week. However, I will at some point do a follow-up podcast on Bud Abbott sometime in the future, as during my research for this show, I have found that both men have had interesting and troubled lives, each with their own story to tell.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 161, we are going to be looking at the disappearance of Emma Philippoff. Emma Philippoff is a Canadian woman who has been missing since the 28th of November in 2012. She was last seen in front of the Empress Hotel in Victoria, British Columbia, at the age of 26, and most of the evidence indicates that she was planning to return home to Ottawa. But there was no proof that she ever left Victoria, and the cell phone she bought has never been activated. She has never been seen since.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. But the pronunciations of all the names, of course, was all me. The voices in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. Sorry, Neil. And a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast. But if you do know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message. I'll see what I can do. I will also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast, if they are happy for me to do so, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember, guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. No AI was used or harmed in the making of this or any other episode of Mark's Unexplained World. This show and its contents are all covered by the basic copyright of Mark the Medium.